we're going to shout it from the top of a building loud and proud that like cannabis is here to stay. It's not bad. It's better for this country, and that we should continue legalization. For all of these bureaucrats, they're juggling a lot of different things. And the number one thing is, hey, am I going to get reelected? Am I going to be able to go to higher office? That's what's driving the bus for them. And so when you look at it that way, in a list of priorities and headline risk, cannabis kind of falls to the waist. I don't think there's that many politicians that can honestly say they hate cannabis, or they think it's so dangerous, or that it really should be a Schedule 1 drug, or that legalization won't help create jobs or be something good to consider post COVID. But it's a question of like, are they willing to really take that stance, and what is the potential downside to them in that moment? And I think because of that, this has been a very slow process. Even the most outspoken Democrats are, very measured in terms of what they do, right?
I mean, we can't, John Hickenlooper, who we just gave Cory Gardner, we gave it to him. We gave him Cory Gardner's seat, who had been fairly, I'm going to guess, somewhat friendly for the state, in regards to cannabis. So we thought that by electing a more progressive person in John Hickenlooper, that it would help kind of like push or advocate for a national federal legislation that would kind of like at least decriminalize it, to leave it to states. But he is vehement in the stance of, I don't want it to be legalized nationwide. And I can understand that. We've heard from business owners in the cannabis industry who think that maybe it shouldn't be legalized nationwide, but maybe let a state by state basis handle it, but decriminalizing it from a federal stance. I mean, that's not too brave of a place to stand. Like, saying that there are people that are incarcerated for the same thing that, very rich, people are getting very rich off of, it's highly pathetic. And someone who comes from Mississippi, but I happen to be white, I get a little bit more of the breaks than say, somebody else that doesn't have that luxury in Jackson, Mississippi. And so now I make a podcast where we can't get every sponsorship because of our direct affiliation with cannabis, but we do work heavily. We're heavily entrenched in the business. So that's why I get angry about it. I'm like, why are people in jail for it? Especially in a state like Mississippi, where, their Republican government, just our Supreme Court in the state, overruled the vote of 72% of their population. Like, it's just infuriating. So I'm always curious, where do you stand on do you think it should be legalized federally, or what do you, I know it's not black and white, it's gray, but where do you stand on that line?
No, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that it should be legalized. And I think over 70% of the American population also thinks it should be legalized, right? Like, it's not even really a contest at this point. When do I think it's going to be legalized?
Then why are they so scared?
Yeah.
Like, why won't they? I mean, is it because they can't find their way to they get rich off of all of us in every capacity? Are they just trying to find their way to get their dollar before they let everybody else kind of get in the game? Like, what are they waiting on if 70% of the country likes it?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's like I said, I'm not a politician myself. And
Me neither.
If it's one thing that it's taught me, is that it's a dirty business, right? Like, it really is a dirty business. And there's lobbyists all over the place. Everybody has their own initiative. Even what I've seen in states that are trying to legalize, like, you have a bill, it's in favor, but then what happens is, a state senator blocks the bill because the state senator is mad at the governor because the governor stole the governorship from him. And this is his way to kind of, spite him. And this is where politics just gets silly. And this is the reality of like state by state politics and the way it works, and alliances and blah, blah, and broker deals, and everybody has their own initiative and incentive. And as a result, things that are really good for the community get hindered and get kind of kicked to the curb or get stopped. When, to your point, what's stopping it? Like, is it so crazy? Is it so dangerous to decriminalize? No, I don't think it is.
I couldn't agree more. And, you mentioned you had gotten to California just before it became recreational, but they had kind of, they were obviously the flagship in the country back in the early 2000s, and Colorado slowly followed right behind them. But we've kind of had different rollout plans, both how y'all handled it and then like how Colorado has handled it. How do you feel like is it more advantageous? And as you're going to other states, has California prepared you to be more successful, or have you found more loopholes in the newer states as you are starting to look around? Because I feel like y'all are
I
kind
I
of
think
wild,
it's a
wild
completely,
west. Like y'all can buy and mass produce,
yeah,
like it's crazy.
it's I like to think of it really as like the West Coast and the East Coast, and I like to think of it as the West Coast is more of an entrepreneurial free market, a greater appreciation and understanding of cannabis. They reward competition. They want, better products. The consumer base is more educated. There's more competition as a result. Some would call it a saturated market. But, as you see in Colorado, it's hard to fake it.
Yeah.
There's so much competition. You kind of have to be doing something right if you're going to stay in business. But the same thing, like Colorado or California, it's not impossible to get into the industry. Is it really hard to be successful? Yes. But can you take a shot at it? Absolutely. And I think California is very much the same. What I think California has done right is exactly what we just said, is that it's been a free market, it's been entrepreneurial, it's rewarded competition. Um, it's let the local counties kind of decide and the cities decide if they want it, how they want it, how much of it they want. Where I think California has not done a great job is that, again, we're the largest legal cannabis market in the world, and we don't even have a state banking system. Like, even if the federal government doesn't recognize it, California, 3 years into this, should have been like, hey, we should develop a state run banking system to help this multi billion dollar industry stand on its feet and grow. Likewise, has California done a great job monitoring and shrinking the black market and the illegal dispensaries? No, they haven't. And that's ultimately led to lower tax revenue, which then they point at the legal operators as like, you guys are doing something wrong. But it's not the license operators doing something wrong. It's the state not rolling out a optimized plan for cannabis legalization.
So do you have faith in like the system that's in place, or do you see that the people that like Gavin Newsom or whomever may be next, do y'all have faith in the system that you have? Because, like you said, you are the largest market in the world. And, as New York goes legal, it's kind of like as New York goes, the country does as well. But they're looking at y'all because it's how do we do this with this large market? So is there optimism, or is there like starting to become doubt creeping in, like that? It is almost oversaturation. It's like, obviously you have to have a great product to stay competitive and stay alive, just as it is for our restaurateurs, especially in LA. And then of course the unfriendly taxes. So like everything's always vying against you, especially when you come into one of these industries. But how have you been able to be so successful with a state, what is it? A golden state cannabis? How have things been able to thrive so well? The water system, what are you doing so well?
Yeah. So again, I think for us, we obviously come from, a disciplined finance background. So we've stayed very focused, and very, in our lane in terms of what we wanted to build, which was a cannabis brand, a golden state, which would be, the highest level of cannabis that you can buy, right? And like you mentioned, whether it's the fact that it's carbon neutral, whether it's the fact that the genetics are proprietary, whether it's the fact that it's watered from snowmelt water from Mount Shasta, all of these things lead to a really premium cannabis experience. That's allowed us to like insulate ourselves from like market pressures, right? Where a lot of people are producing, um, lower quality cannabis by large volume, it kind of becomes a race to the bottom in terms of pricing. Whereas what we focus on is really small batch craft cannabis, exotic strains, ultra high quality, high terpene profiles, high cannabinoid profiles. So we've been able to create a profitable business, which allows us to withstand the changing climate of California. And you ask a great question, like, are we optimistic? We have to be optimistic. If we're not optimistic, it's like, what the hell are we doing here, right? um, but that doesn't mean we're optimistic that something's going to change tomorrow. It might take 3 years or 5 years, but we still have to have a business that's viable and profitable and allowing us to grow it. And that business has to be able to withstand the changing climate, even if it's not the easiest climate for a cannabis company to do business in.
Yeah. And I feel, you do have a lot of things working against you, but you have a lot of things in place that are able to weather a storm if things were to get, rocky or rough. Do y'all have like, I think it's always what's next, or you ask somebody if they have a great flower, it's do you do oil? It's always what can you do for me next? Are you going to bring
Mhm.
this I mean, I'm able to taste the delicious bud, but when is everyone, like we mentioned, the East Coast and West Coast? Do y'all have a plan to go home? Do you have a plan to set up shop in the burbs? What's the expansion plan to kind of like, you have this wealth of knowledge. Are you going to do a circuit tour and like, consult other companies on how to do this properly? What's the goal for y'all or future?
Yeah, so we're always looking to innovate, right? And from a product standpoint, we're launching solventless oil pens coming out in a few weeks. We have, a brand new gummy line, vegan, all natural gummies coming out in a few weeks. We just launched whole flower pre-rolls. So, strains are always evolving. And then when it comes to multi-state expansion, we're in the process of currently expanding into New Jersey. We're looking with a partner at New York, Florida. We're looking at an opportunity in Massachusetts, and now we're in the conversations to start exploring Connecticut as Connecticut thinks about, an adult use bill.
Okay. So yeah, you will stick to the coasts, as they say. I like it. And I mean,
Yeah, I think it's so, yeah, it's hard, man, right? Like, it's hard about these businesses, and especially for us, right? Like, we focus on something that's very premium. So I can't just license my brand to an operator in Missouri because there's no way for me to control the type of quality he's going to be producing. And, we stand by our product. I can control that nug by nug, joint by joint, whatever it is in California. So for me to open up in another state, I have to have that type of ownership and vertical build out in order to give that customer accountability in terms of why they would be buying a Golden State. And that, that's what makes it challenging in this current state by state model.
okay. So you would want to be a more hands-on. So you want to have your, I guess, feet on the ground, your team building and growing the operation rather than just like partnering up with someone. Cause you see some folks like the cookies brand, they're in every fucking state, it seems like now, but they kind of
Mhm.
outsource, whether it be their genetics to local people who are growing pretty good pot. And so shout out to our friends Veritas who are doing it here. They do have fine cannabis, but I just didn't know if it would become a white labeled product or if you wanted to take your show on the road. But I'm excited about the solventless pen as well. That's what's up. That's the one who I think the discreet smoking, because the stigma around cannabis is starting to shift where a house mom or a dad that just put their kid down is starting to take a rip of the pen. It's not you have to go roll a joint and stink up the house or come in looking like or smelling like a skunk. It's more concealed. And so getting into that market, I mean, we grip and rip those things at dinner, like on the bus, on the train. It doesn't matter. I'll hit it everywhere. So it's a great
Yeah,
concept.
no, I completely agree with you. I mean, as much as a flower purist as I am,
Uh-huh.
you know, solventless oil pens, especially the types that we create, you're getting that robust terpene profile like you're smoking a joint. It's a truly a premium experience at this point. And I agree with you that as more and more new recreational consumers come into the industry, they want those convenience points you just described, right? Discretion, no smell, ability to travel. They don't want to maybe combust flower, things like that, right? So I think as oil products get better, it's great because we're just going to see more consumers coming into cannabis, and hopefully over time, their tastes allow them to graduate into other cannabis products, and maybe eventually they do become a flower smoker too, right?
Yeah. And, I feel obviously, first off, I need to give you a shout out. Your verbiage today is just running circles around me. I feel like I'm having to like keep up. I'm like, shit, those are big words. But you're right. As these more of these, how suburban folks come into the game rather than seeing it as a black market drug, it has. And we saw over the pandemic, the edibles, New York Times reported, I think Chris has mentioned it on previous podcasts, they saw this massive spike. And so it has become, it's very quiet. You can travel with it and it's not loud. So the market's growing and I think it's great for business, but I think folks are going to enjoy that solventless. You mentioned 2 or 3 different variants of getting high. Are you still a purist at heart? What's your go-to way to catch a buzz?
I love flower, dude. I've always loved flower. I like the processy of rolling a joint. I love smelling nugs. I like seeing the frost. Like I just love that, right? I
The
I
sticky
don't mind
bud.
smelling like a skunk. I actually kind of like it. Like, yeah, that just, I mean,
I do
yeah.
too. The girlfriend
Yeah,
hates it.
exactly.
She's like, that pen is so much better than when you go outside and just torch a bowl of loud. It's great. I love it.